I needed to hire a car, and so typed in budget car rental in an internet search, and on pressing enter, I was more than surprised when instead of a screen full of competing car rental companies, I was left looking at the homepage of an internationally renowned English psychic medium who was holding a course in Australia. I stared confusedly at the page, unable to conceive how the entry, budget car rental, could have been corrupted into English psychic medium. And despite not believing in spiritualism's belief system surrounding so-called psychic phenomena, considering what had just occurred, I might have chosen to sign up for the course to investigate further if it hadn't been for the sold-out banner graphically placed across the image of the man teaching the course. I was just about to navigate out of the site when a thumbnail link in the bottom right-hand corner of the page caught my eye, and I clicked on it to be taken to the homepage of a residential school of mediumship held in a stately home in the UK. And it was in that moment that I decided to book that trip to London. At the time, over several months, I had also been suffering from the same recurrent dream, repeating through night after night of restless sleep, leaving me exhausted throughout my days. The incessant nature of such recurrent dreams would always be a sign that resolution would undoubtedly soon become evident in some predictive way. But not so for this particular dream. It got to the point that I was even reluctant to surrender to falling asleep at the risk of the same dream intruding into my nocturnal thoughts again. Find M3. You've got to find M3. Get off here for M3. 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 The various characters in my dream would bark at me as I travelled on buses, trams and trains, only to disembark and walk around aimlessly. Even my wife, Den, knowing how I was being tormented, started to search around for me to see if she could find some relevance or place that related to M3. All to no avail. I just didn't know where M3 was or what cryptic meaning M3 was supposed to have, and it did cross my mind, with the apparent guidance to fly over to the UK, that perhaps I would find M3 during the trip. On that first night, after arriving at the stately home from Bath, jet lag still saw me waking at 1:30 a.m. Unable to sleep, I dressed and wandered through the old impressive hall. The heating system wasn't the best, leaving the air in the expansive spaces quite cool. But on opening a door along a ground floor corridor, I found that a short stretch of the corridor was cosily sealed by a second door a few meters further along. The space was warm, I later learnt, due to the boiler room being located immediately below in the basement, and since there was a bench there, next to a spiral staircase that led back up to the accommodation floors, I sat down and tried to warm up. I had only been there for 10 minutes or so when I heard footsteps approaching and someone whistling to themselves. The corridor door to my left opened, and a man stopped abruptly, surprised at seeing someone sitting in the enclosed space at such an early hour. In front of me was standing the psychic medium I had seen on that initial webpage, minus the sold-out banner. He stepped forward to introduce himself and shook my hand. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked on the move again. "Just jet-lagged," I replied. "Ah, well, you've found the best place to keep warm." And he exited the opposite corridor door to my right, and his whistling resumed and faded away as he walked off. The man was not part of the advertised teaching team on the course, and I later learned that he'd in fact been delayed on a long drive across the country, and with the late hour, had decided to stop at the hall overnight and resume his journey the following morning. With the unexpected appearance of that man, I at least knew that I had been guided to the right place for whatever it was I was supposed to learn or witness there. And with that, I decided to return to my room. I stood to step onto the spiral staircase that led to the upper accommodation floors, and resolution was to be instantly rendered complete. On the wall, facing me, was a small sign on which was written M3, with an arrow pointing upstairs. The display of synchronicity was astounding. Over the week of the course, I found it increasingly challenging in having to immerse myself in their particular paradigm of an afterlife and spirits of the dead that had crossed the veil and survived. It made no sense to me, and I'd always been able to explain mediumistic phenomena in other ways. And while I was more than willing to temporarily discard the robes of my own beliefs and respectfully don theirs to see if there was a fit that I wasn't aware of, it did make for interesting discussions over the dining tables of the communal dining room. But over breakfast one morning, on frankly admitting to someone that I didn't believe in all this, a medium on the table behind me who'd been listening to the conversation leant over and said, "Not believing is fantastic, Daniel. That means you can step into anyone's paradigm to help them." And that short, insightful statement instantly squared the dilemma I was facing. It's not a matter of believing or disbelieving. It's a matter of acceptance, stepping in, and being available to help others, regardless of what they or you believe. The 6 days of the course passed quickly, and despite having somehow successfully and competently given that 1-hour demonstration the week before, the act of trying to provide messages from beyond the veil on cue in the classes proved fruitless. The automaton state I had found myself in at the church was one thing, but outside of that, it was becoming obvious to me that I had no talent in the field of mediumship. The events at the church in Bath had been fascinating, but it was similar to the other automaton experiences I'd had over the years. All in all, it had apparently been an expensive excursion across to the other side of the world, just to find a small plastic sign on a wall with M3 written on it. I was ready for home and decided to pack my suitcase instead of attending the final afternoon session. But as I'd vastly overestimated how long it would take to pack, I ended up joining the class, in which a couple of the different groups had come together in one room, with students pairing up in speed dating fashion to deliver messages from the deceased, putting into practice what they had learnt. As usual, I got nothing, and apologetically invited those I was partnered with to continue on with their messages to me, some of which were quite intriguing and thought-provoking. The facilitator, again, shouted above the loud, chattering noise around the room, glancing at the clock on the wall. "Okay, time. Swap partners. Last readings, so make it count." And I was relieved that the course was finally coming to an end. My final partner, a young woman, sat down in front of me with a smile and asked if I would like to go first. And my lips opened to offer the usual apology, when instead I said, "There's a young boy with me who is desperate to contact you." The noise in the room was no longer audible to me, as if I was existing in a bubble of silence. He died on a skiing holiday, but this was no accident. He was sitting on a ski lift ascending to the top of the mountain, and his heart just stopped beating. So young. The woman opposite me teared up on recognizing the boy, and over the next 10 minutes, I told her everything he needed her to know about the tormented short life he'd suffered, which was exactly what she'd needed to know to deal with her grief. The sound in the room flooded back into my senses as the teary-eyed woman leant forward to hug me. Those words, "Not believing is fantastic, Daniel. It means you can step into anyone's paradigm to help them," had found a home. And it was in that moment I decided to continue on a journey of exploration into the subject of consciousness through an investigation into mediums and seances, and I was to return to the hall many times. But there had been one other pivotal moment during that first week. At the beginning of one of the sessions, the facilitator asked the group of 10 sitting in a circle to close our eyes and take some slow, deep breaths to center ourselves. Almost instantly, I felt myself begin to slip helplessly and disconnectedly into a familiar, distant half-world of slowing time, and the axes of space and time began stretching away to infinity. Blue, suspended in luminous electric blue. If silence has no place for sound, blue had no place for silence. If stillness has no place for motion, blue had no place for stillness. If eternity has no place for an ending, blue had no place for eternity. If absolute purity has no place for false, blue had no place for absolute purity. Thought did not exist. Existence was blue. I came back to the moment with a start and opened my eyes, glancing around the room like I always do, to check no one had seen the slip. Everyone around the circle was quiet and still, taking in deep breaths with eyes closed. Everyone, that is, except for the facilitator, who was looking in my direction with a smile. "The blue is just trance," she half-mouthed and half-whispered to me so as not to disturb the others. That she too, watching on, had seen the blue colour I'd been suspended in took me aback for a second, and I instantly knew that the woman was for real. At least now, I had a word to describe the disconnected automaton states that had descended upon me over the years. Trance. And while such phenomena, being experienced by others attending the hall, only further confirmed their beliefs in a survival after death in some afterlife or spirit world, for me, the phenomena experienced only made me more convinced that no such afterlife could exist.